If you've been trying out Yuan or just pulled for her, you might have a load of questions. What's her best team? Is she actually good? Should I build this character? Well, today I've got a few thoughts, conclusions, and the 3 best teams I believe Yuan has after testing her out a lot. But before we get into that, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe if you like this and want to see more ZenlessZoneZero content. Let's get into it. The first thing we need to address is Yuan's strengths and weaknesses. Now, I'll be honest, I'm definitely not the best ZenlessZoneZero player, and I'm still learning things every day about combat. However, I have picked up and learned a few new things about her strengths and weaknesses. Let's talk strength. This one is pretty sweet, simple, and obvious. Her damage was always known to be high, but her ability to use this to one-shot and clear mobs alongside a character like Nicole or through chain attacks is way more impactful than you'd think. In some endgame fights like Shiyu defense, eliminating the non-boss enemies first is especially high priority. When these enemies are alive, they decrease how much damage the main boss take, so therefore deleting them first is important. But now, let's talk weakness. This one is less obvious if you haven't reached Shiyu defense or some of the harder endgame fights, but the truth is that she's actually pretty fragile if you aren't taking advantage of the dash optimizations that she has available. This does require you to learn a bit more about the character and may be a turnoff for those of you who just want to mindlessly slam their characters into a wall. But there's actually an even bigger weakness than this, which is that sometimes these optimizations that you learn and practice might not even feel practical. I apologize because actually I just lied to you again. I don't know why I did this, but her greatest weakness isn't even the optimizations not being practical or useful. It's actually the fact that the targeting while doing them just feels terrible. As someone that has been trying extremely hard to learn and optimize their combos, I cannot express how frustrating the camera and targeting is at times. If you're playing a melee character, this may never end up being an issue. However, the amount of times that I've spent trying to hit an enemy directly next to me but was forced to target someone else is ridiculous. So now we have an idea of what her strengths and weaknesses are. Let's talk about the teams she excels with and which of them is her best. I keep lying for some reason in this video, my bad, but there is actually no such thing as the best team for her, which could be a good or a bad thing. The best team for Yuan probably hasn't even been released yet, and as of now, there are plenty of reasons to alternate between the best team compositions that you're running with her. Yuan will certainly do great with all the teams I'm about to be listing, but keep in mind that there really isn't a single best team since there are different reasons to take each composition. The first team I found insane success with is Yuan, Coleta, and Nicole. I spent a lot of time losing my mind trying to make Ambi work when I first started using Yuan, and Coleta was honestly my crutch. Truthfully, she definitely feels way safer and more impactful since she stuns quickly and has a lot of invincibility in her kit. However, what feels best about this team is that Coleta's AoE complements Nicole's Black Hole and Yuan's burst combo extremely well. If you are able to vacuum enemies together with Nicole's Black Hole and also apply daze via Coleta's special attack at the same time, this combo almost feels overkill to use and typically just one-shots any spawned enemies. If you recall from the strength section, this means you have even more time spent hitting a vulnerable boss and is definitely perfect for those of you who aren't super familiar with Ambi. Before we get to the next team, I need to come clean. I was definitely not maximizing Ambi's potential when I first tried her. I was deathly afraid of getting one shot by the level 70 enemies, but once I became more familiar with how much daze I applied, her ideal combos and rotations, and also the enemy's attack patterns, using her became so much easier. And after doing so, I actually became an even bigger fan of her than I originally was. And therefore, we still have to talk about her as arguably one of the strongest teams of all, and this is Yuan, Ambi, and Nicole. This team's strength in a lot of people's eyes starts and stops because Ambi and Nicole are both free. Plain and simple. However, this is not actually the end of it. Ambi in exchange for Coleta may feel like a downgrade, but Ambi actually has a lot of value in her stun even when she doesn't have the energy to use her special attack. The reason for her overall absurd daze value is that Ambi increases the daze multiplier of a 4th hit that she performs after her 3 basic attacks. This means that she can basic attack 3 times and quickly use her special attack to inflict a ridiculous 650% daze multiplier. You can also do this while swapping to Nicole and prep a black hole so that you can avoid waiting on this animation at the same time. This may sound standard for stunners, but Ambi's ability to constantly put stun pressure on small enemies or progress the boss's daze meter all without energy is insane. Therefore, if you're able to combine the stun potential and grouping of Ambi plus Nicole, you have a crazy combo of stuns and vacuums. This isn't even taking into account that this allows your Yuan to chain attack, quick assist, and receive an insane amount of shotgun shells and free damage at the exact same time. The third and final team I found great success with is unconventional, but it's Yuan, Lycone, and Sokaku. You can already tell by this point how mismatched or unusual Yuan's teams are, since this is definitely just stealing Ellen's best in slot team and running it. However, you'd be surprised, this team is super easy to play and performs well too. The main downside of this team is not having any use for the ice related bonuses or shred for Yuan specifically, but I've actually found that even Sokaku and Lycone deal moderate damage at times and can make use of the buffs/debuffs on occasion. A faster clear speed of spawned in enemies will always be great, as we've mentioned dozens of times at this point, but let's move ahead to the main selling point of this team. It will still complement any character extremely well with its buffs and debuffs, regardless of what element the agent is. In the traditional team format for Ellen, you have a stunner and a buffer which set her up to deal insane damage. This doesn't change when you swap out Ellen for Yuan, and therefore she still benefits greatly. The obvious loss here, as I've mentioned, is the fact that some of their kit is wasted. However, this doesn't stop Yuan from gaining 1000 attack and increasing the damage she deals to a stunned enemy by 35%. Pair this with the fact that Lycone stuns enemies insanely fast, and suddenly no enemy is left alive, since you are constantly spamming chain attack after chain attack and shotgun shells every single time a new enemy is spawned in. As I'm sure you could tell by what I fixated on for each team, the most important feeling when it came to Yuan was making sure her weakness was covered. In the time I spent playing her, this was definitely her getting shot at by multiple enemies or being unable to use her attacks, since she was constantly getting interrupted. To be clear, you could argue that some of this is skill issue, however most of you, I hope, are not robots, and you'll observe just how frustrating it is to try and unload her shotgun shells if you don't have some way to stun or eliminate threats first. In terms of when I would use each team, there is something worth keeping in mind. If fighting an enemy your agents have an element advantage to, the enemy has minus 20% damage resistance, minus 20% daze resistance, and minus 20% anomaly buildup resistance to that attribute. If your agents are element disadvantaged against the enemy gains an additional 20% damage resistance, an additional 20% daze resistance, and an additional 20% anomaly buildup resistance to that attribute. So with this in mind, one thing to consider is using certain team compositions if they have element advantage, so you can build stun or anomaly faster. Now the other thing to consider of course is avoiding a fight against someone who does have an advantage against you. Personally, based on what I've seen from resource management, I haven't seen many who can actually afford to swap their teams and elements like this, but it is worth considering once we gain more resources. The other thing to consider is whether certain aspects of a kit, like the increased daze and invincibility frames from a character like Kaleda, is helpful, but ultimately you're going to have to weigh the pros and cons between that and losing something like Lycone's stun multiplier against certain enemies. The final and last thing I'd like to mention is that the team that you'll inevitably end up running will just be dependent on who you invested in or who you pulled for, but these are less gameplay issues as opposed to account focused concerns, and this wasn't as much of a concern for me as I was trying to make this more gameplay focused. Of course, these were just my observations and conclusions, but I sincerely think that all the teams that I mentioned are both viable and perform extremely well. That's going to be it for this video though, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. Make sure to check out the rest of my socials. I'll see you all next time. Thanks again for stopping by. Good night. It's another video completed. If you want to see another one, you should click on the link above. Sorry, I don't even know what to put in these sections anymore. Aha, click on the YouTube video. Goodbye, good night, good afternoon. Hope you have good luck. Ta-ta.